Did you know that parents rank financial literacy as the #1 most difficult life skill to teach? Meet Greenlight, the debit card and money app for families. With Greenlight, you can send money to kids quickly, set up chores, automate allowance, and keep an eye on your kids' spending with real-time notifications. Kids learn to earn, save, and spend wisely, and parents can rest easy knowing their kids are learning about money with guardrails in place. Try Greenlight risk-free today at greenlight.com/audio.
It's the Opperman Report. Join digital forensic investigator and PI Ed Opperman for an in-depth discussion of conspiracy theories, strategy of New World Order resistance, high-profile court cases in the news, and interviews with expert guests and authors on these topics and more. It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. You could find me at Opperman Investigations and Digital Forensic Consulting, either through my website, emailrevealer.com, or you can contact me directly at oppermaninvestigations@gmail.com. If you like our show, be sure and check out our Patreon. You can go to Opperman Report Patreon section. We put up about 8 new hours of brand new content each month over at Patreon, and that's what helps support the show. And we're not we don't have any long-term contracts with these stations, so any day we could just go tune in one night, and the Opperman Report's not there. So you want to keep in contact with us. Patreon is a good way to do that. But our archives are always free at Spreaker.com. Go to Spreaker.com. We have a live show we do there every Friday night. And if you sign up for free, you get an email notification anytime we put up new content. And there's also a chat room in there, too. You can chat with other listeners at Spreaker.com. Our guest today is Joanna Britton. And you could find her on Twitter at JEBRITTAN. Joanna Britton. And we're going to be talking about the Sherborne Preparatory School over there in England, which has a reputation of having a headmaster who was a pedophile abusing the young men and boys at this school. It was known about for 30-some years. This Robin Lindsay. By the way, I got to correct that. The Twitter account is JEBRITTAN number 2. J.E. Britton 2. Joanna Britton, are you there?
Yes, I am. Yes. Hi, Ed. Hi.
How are you? Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Oh, it's really good to be able to talk about this because it's the first time I've really done that. So it's
yeah, I know.
Good.
I found you on Twitter there, and it seems like you've really devoted your life to exposing this Sherborne Prep School over in the UK. But before we get to that, tell us about yourself. Who is Joanne Britton?
Hi. Okay, Ed. So I'm a mum of 3, and I live in Devon now. And my parents were living in Qatar for all of my childhood. In fact, my mother left Qatar just last year. And since I've had children, I suppose, I felt very determined to protect children and advocate for my 3 brothers who were all sent to this prep school in Dorset. In our country, in certain circles, it's a sort of tradition to send children away when they're 8 years old to boarding schools, and particularly in the armed forces. And my father was he was a naval pilot from Dartmouth Naval Academy, where Prince Andrew went. So he put my elder brother's name down at birth, and he got the job in Qatar, setting up the Air Force, and he was a test pilot when they were buying aircraft. And my brothers were all sent to Sherborne Prep with a view to passing common entrance and going on to big schools. And we all went on to Sherborne Girls and Sherborne Boys School. Yeah. But the quest for justice is really to expose what happened at the prep school. It's actually a 75-year history of paedophilia because the father and the son were both pedophiles, and they had it from 1923 until 1998 when Lindsay was banned from working with children and forced out by the Department of Education. But it's a very, very dark history, and when you contacted me, I warned you that it's sinister, really, and it's misrepresented abroad where they franchise it, and that really disturbs me, that it's all whitewashed and no heed is given to these poor children who are left there as children in the care of a paedophile.
Yeah, this is a very widespread abuse went on in the school for 30 years. It was known about to authorities, to officials for 30 years. The headmaster, Robin Lindsay. What kind of a man was Robin Lindsay?
So Robin Lindsay was, his father was an Irish family from Portadown in County Antrim. I don't understand that history, Orange man, but he was very religious. He'd studied religion in Trinity in Dublin, and the family came to Sherborne, and he arrived at school in 1918 and bought it in 1923. And then Robin Lindsay was his eldest child, I think, or eldest son, who was born in 1928 in the school. And then he was privately educated. He went to study theology at Trinity, Cambridge, and came back in 1953 and started teaching at Sherborne Prep, where his father was still headmaster, and his father died in 1972. But from what I found after my brother disclosed to me, and which I copied and gave to the police and the Independent Inquiry in England, with dozens of disclosures by men now, but they were old men. They'd been at Sherborne Prep in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And they were disclosing abuse, and dozens of them, and the accounts were really shocking, and I copied it all, and contributed as well. I used the pseudonym Angel, and I just thought it's too important, there needs to be a record of this, and I copied it all, and then suddenly the website shut down, and so I was really glad that I had, but it was proof that, that I'd been looking for actually for a long, long time, because I've known Lindsay from 1973 till 1985 when my youngest brother left. I'd known him as a girl, and I watched him take each of my brothers from my parents, in his study. So, he was a man I knew, and he was just disgusting. He was a bachelor, obviously, and my mother used to say, well, he was so eccentric, Joe, but he used to wear these long coats, and he stank. His nickname was Skunk, and he used to stink of Slim Panatellas, Henry Winterman's, and B.O., and it's just really horrible man. And every time I look at my parents and think, because I was still very young, and children were not really sort of very outspoken then, I used to think, how can you leave your children with a man like that? He's just horrible. And it was very difficult, I think, for my brothers to speak out and express as children.
It is amazing. It was a whole different world back in those days. We just did things that just my parents. We just did things that were just so crazy. How old was your brother when he came to you and told you about what was going on?
He did that on my birthday 3 years ago. It was April 2017, and Lindsay had died in 2016, 6 months before. He told me on a beach on my birthday, and that was when I really sort of got going. I tried to get justice. I wanted to get him jailed. I started in 2009, but my brothers, I tried in 2011. I asked each of them if they had anything to disclose, and would they want me to go after him, and they gave me the green light, but they didn't want to speak about it. And so I contacted lawyers, and I tried to get justice, but the Department of Education, they just franchised it in Qatar, and there was so much money involved that it was impossible to get any data. They cited the Data Protection Act, and then I got freedom of information. I got 5 documents released, and in those documents, it was they were just incredibly damning, and the reasons why he'd been released, and it would have been enough to get him jailed, but they didn't want the scandal because the Qatar royal family were franchising the prep school, and as I explained about the common entrance passes, they wanted access to the top public schools in Britain, and in order to do that, you need a common entrance pass, and they wouldn't send their children away young like we were, so they wanted them to be gained locally in Qatar, and for that you need a prep school. So the history was completely whitewashed, and apparently from 2009 onwards, they've been paying millions of pounds every year just to use the good name Sherborne, when the history, the real history, is very dark indeed, and has never been acknowledged properly. And it's just that's the justice I'm looking for, the acknowledgement and the no more whitewashing.
Well, why don't you describe to us some of the behavior of Rob and Lindsay, the things he used to do to these young boys?
So, I had dozens of people disclose to me. I'd read them, and they were very, very similar. And they were similar to what I'd heard as a girl growing up, because my three brothers were there, and they'd kind of talk about it and laugh about it, because it was sort of bitter, because they had no escape. My eldest brother made the most noise, but because he wasn't heard and my parents were in Qatar, they were so far away, it was their fate, really, and that you sort of normalise it. If you can't get away from it, then you've got no option. You know that, and you're also told by your family that you're very privileged to have this education. You're lucky to be there, and it's chosen and paid for. It's very expensive. It's I think it's very difficult for children, and it's an appalling burden to have to carry the weight of parental expectation when they've made sacrifices to send you, and you have the weight of their investment on your shoulders, and they don't want to see that it's fraudulent or they've made a wrong choice. So his behaviour, a lot of the victims would describe being visited by him at night, and he'd take them to his study. He used to rub. My brother described this, rubbing his back, saying, "Are you awake, boy? Are you awake?" And he corporal punishment, of course, was still possible in public schools and prep schools. I think right up until 1998, even though in state schools it was outlawed, banned, and some parents wanted their children to be punished, and he used to get paedophilic kicks, I suppose, out of corporal punishment. So he'd have a boy on his lap and spank him, and that was sexually arousing for him.
One of the accounts I read is he would actually have the boys go put on their pajamas before he would spank them.
No, if he was going to punish boys, I think there was all sorts of things I've got in documentation that they knew that they were going to get a punishment later, they'd have to be wearing their pajamas. But no, I think he pretty much removed them, and he had different slippers that he'd used, particularly a Moroccan slipper that he got on holiday. He had certain, I think, victims that he would specially select who might be, these are my views from what I've heard from lots of general reading and general disclosures, because I can't really talk too much about any particular one, so it's a very generalization, sort of generalized view like you've got from me, because I was never sent there. I was sent to girls' prep school, so
right,
because it went co-ed the year after I was sent away. And
one of the other things I saw described was that he would walk through the boys' bedrooms at night and find boys that were awake, and then bring them back to his own bed and give them sleeping pills.
Yeah, he did that. He did so many strange things. In the social services report, they talk about drugging children, and they'd wake up and find that they weren't in their bed. They were wondering why they were on a sofa, and there are quotes taken. The most shocking thing that was read at ICSA was a quote taken from a carer in his nursing home when he got Alzheimer's or dementia. I can't remember which. And apparently he said, come here, get into bed with me, let me fuck you like it. Sorry, I'm not allowed to say.
You can't do that. Yeah. Okay. Then the other one too was
let me like I did that to the little boys in my school. Anyway,
right.
I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. Now, and also too, there was another incident with showers, that he would go into the boys' showers while they were showering, and would have them sometimes shower 3 times a day.
Much more than that.
Really?
I heard that was in the recording that my brother made with Alex Renton. They were talking about 3 times a day, but it escalated so that by the time he left in '98, everything had got out of control, and they were talking about 10 times a day or more. You know, there was no. He just got more and more out of control. So the voices that you've got there in that recording are boys who were there in 1972, 1974. There were 3 men speaking with Alex Renton, and they were all from about that era, early 70s. And what I found was the men who were disclosing, you said what age was my brother? He was about 55 when he disclosed to me. They're much older than any other survivors of child abuse because of the parental investment, the fact that the education be paid for, and they wait for their parents to die very often before they, they don't want to upset their family. And also, if they're very wealthy families, sometimes there's inheritance at play, that there's sort of investment for themselves. And so they didn't kind of want to rock the boat or upset or go against their families. And it's a real generational divide to go up against your family, because especially if they're generations where they've all sent their children away and they think it's a privilege, it's really hard. And what happens if you do, and this is what I found, you can feel ostracized and disinherited as well. But,
let me ask you this.
You're a black sheep for speaking out.
Yes, since this went on for so many years, are you aware of any situations where, like, a young man would have attended the school, graduate, have his own kids or nephews, and send them to the school?
Yeah.
And have you?
And you know who did that?
Who?
I tell you who did this. Boris Johnson's family.
Really?
Because at the independent inquiry, there are 2 prep schools listed as closed preps, as landmark cases of really, really bad child abuse. And one is Sherborne Prep, and the other is Ashdown House, which is in the same video that you might have seen with my brother. Alex Renton was sent there, and so was Boris Johnson. And Boris Johnson's sister went to Bryanston, very close to my prep. She called it Pedersty Towers. And that was their sort of family nickname. And she and Boris were both there. And he made a private apology. But both he and Rachel sent their own children to the same prep. Now, unfortunately, 2 of my brothers have never had families or children, and certainly it's the last place in the world I'd ever send my children. But you see, it's very easy to kind of diminish it or minimalize it or normalize it, and even trivialize or laugh at it. But as a mother of 3 and coming out of it and having this sort of my brother disclosing to me and having to deal with it as a sort of sibling and supporting him and having grown up with him and seen the difference that it's made to his life and the damage that it did to all of them, really. I mean, I sort of lost all my family, and I feel I have to try and get justice for them, for my, on behalf of my late father who paid this guy so much money. It's actually fraud when you're paying someone to look after your children, and he owns the school and he's a paedophile, and you can't even insure yourself against that, because when you own the school, how can you insure yourself against your own crimes? And so there's no insurance available for the survivors.
Yeah, in the documentary you sent me, it described the over 400 police reports and investigations across the country into these boarding schools and sexual abuse going on at these schools. So this is pretty commonplace.
Really, yeah. And Sherborne was particularly notorious historically. It had a sort of reputation for that with the Wall brothers, and the more research you do, the more you find out about it. But it in certain films it gets mentioned in a certain way, and I would say that there's a lot of peer-on-peer abuse as well as predatory masters and headmasters. That it's a sort of, whether it's normalization or very fine lines between, for example, Alan Turing. I don't know if you've seen this in the news, but his sort of belongings being returned to Sherborne. Well, he was in trouble with the law for homosexuality, and certain writers have written about, how much they loved Sherborne because, their first love was when they were a boy. La la la. It's I don't know. It's a strange thing, and very, very few will talk out. Will speak out about it. How it sort of is now, like that.
Are you aware of any of these young boys going to their parents and complaining, or making police reports, or going to another teacher that maybe wasn't abusive and complaining to them?
Yeah, at that school, yes. I spoke to him, actually, the whistleblower. There was only one teacher who dared to stand up to Lindsay, and he went to the police with another teacher, and both of them lost their jobs and their accommodation. He was sort of newly married, and it seems to me appalling that anybody who's brave enough to stand up for the children in their care gets blacklisted by the IAPS, Independent Association of Preparatory Schools. He told me that they threatened him that he would never work again in private education, in any of these private prep schools, if he ever spoke out again about Robin Lindsay. And so he said to me, well, I never did. And then he explained his career progression. He went to the Dragon Prep and then another prep. And then he became the headmaster of a school in Ascot. He became the history teacher of David Cameron, for example, and flew on Concorde. He's done a recording called The Perfect Gentleman. And I found it really upsetting to watch, because when he's interviewed, he describes his career. And 1984 to 1985, when he was the head of history at Sherborne Prep, he just never mentions it. He says, after a short gap or something like that, and then he carries on. So he was able to sort of leave all these children and knowing that they were, going to be preyed on. And yet there was another teacher who became his safeguarding officer, who 45 years later is still there. He never lost his job. And he taught all three of my brothers, and as the safeguarding officer, he failed all of them.
Okay, wait, hold on. Wait, hold on. So now you're saying that right now there are teachers teaching at this school that were there teaching, that observed what Robin Lindsay had been doing for 30 years. Really?
One teacher.
One teacher.
Yeah, and I've told the independent inquiry, and nothing's been done. He's still there. And also we made a complaint about him, and he's still there. He was a safeguarding officer, and he wrote to the judge. He was the only teacher I could see, because I got the freedom of information, all the letters that the teachers had written to the judge about Lindsay, and the only one giving him a good report was the safeguarding officer, who's still there.
Now,
the contrast in treatment between a whistleblower and somebody who's going to cover up child abuse.
But now, the expression safeguarding officer is not something we use here in the United States. Can you describe what that is?
Sorry, say that again?
Yeah,
a safeguarding officer.
Yeah.
Yes. So we have social services in this country who do inspections. And generally speaking, people who are elite or aristocratic or above, royal or whatever, they think they're above the law. And people like social services, generally, historically anyway, have been in awe of these people because they've got the power legally to protect themselves. They can pay for the top lawyers. They can sue, they can threaten, they can say, get off my land. You know what I mean? They're afraid of people like that. And so they leave their families and their children alone. And it's not that they're better parents, I don't think. It's just that, poorer people can't necessarily protect themselves.
So you're saying that the safeguarding officers are there to protect the poor?
So a safeguarding officer is somebody at the school who, and he's mentioned in the 1997 report, social services report, because they have to have a named safeguarding officer.
Right.
So this man's named, and he's basically in charge of looking after children, making sure, they're all safe, and that's his job. And he was teaching sport with Lindsay for, he was there from 1975, and so he taught all of my brothers.
Well, and wait, and just to clarify too, now there were complaints to some type of a accreditation board, right? That accredits these boarding schools, right? And Lindsay was on that board of directors.
Yeah, that's the IAPS I was talking about, the Independent Association of Prep Schools. So this is the people who threatened the whistleblower. His name's Rydian Llewellyn, because it was published, so right. I'm not afraid of saying it. Rydian Llewellyn, and he had a very good career after that, but they threatened him, and it turned out that the chairman of the board of IAPS was a paedophile, and Lindsay was on the board as well, as his speciality was maths and rugby, I think.
Now, let me ask you a question here. When was the first complaint made to IAPS about the Sherborne school?
Then, I think it was 1984, by Rydian Llewellyn.
1984, and at that time, the name of this safeguarding officer was in that report. He's aware of those complaints to the IAPS.
He would have been, yeah.
Okay.
I presume, I'm not sure when he was made safeguarding officer, but he was named in the 1997 Dorset Social Services report, and I think there were 3 social services reports, but the very worst one, they pretended to have been lost or stolen, and the Department of Education had it, and it wasn't lost or stolen. It was just very, very damning, and they didn't want anybody to see it. It was so bad.
Now, my understanding now is that the Sherborne school now, the people that own it now, are saying, well, we're new owners. We have a new governing body. It's a new financial structure. It's new policies, and we have nothing to do with crimes that took place here in the past. And this is why we are not liable for any...
Yeah, that's right.
Right.
I call it desperately distancing themselves. Desperate distancing.
Okay, but then
nothing to do with us.
My question for you then is, how can they claim that when they employ the same safeguardian officer that was there under at the time when these crimes took place?
Exactly.
Well,
I don't see how they can possibly claim that, because all it was, when Lindsay was banned, and they said we're new, but the people who bought it was the Vicar of Sherborne, bought it for £1, and he was a governor of Sherborne Boys from '92. The people who bought it were the 2 big schools in Sherborne Girls and Sherborne Boys, and they set up a new governing body. So basically, the school was exactly the same, just minus Lindsay, and they hadn't got any money to change it, hadn't got any money to invest. The teaching staff were exactly the same, and they'd all covered up child abuse. None of them had been whistleblowers. Just disgusting. And if they had mandatory reporting in law, which is what a lot of sort of campaign groups are pushing for, mandatory reporting of child abuse, so that if you witness it, it's a crime not to report it.
Right.
And therefore, if that was the case back then, I mean, in my opinion, an awful lot of people in Sherborne would be criminal.
Right, well,
it's just kind of blind eye.
But especially the safeguardian officer, like you said, who's trained. That's his one job. Okay, is to guard these children. This is what he's trained to do. This is what he's employed to do. Now, have you presented your case to an attorney to try to obtain damages against the school?
I've tried all the top law firms in England. The very top. I went to about 12 of them.
Okay.
And we discussed it at length. And the problem I had with every single one of them was the fact that Robin Lindsay owns the school. If he had been a teacher that they could have moved or got rid of, or very often they behave like churches, like they do with priests, and they move masters around.
Right.
And IAPS is kind of the body that kind of protects the reputations of these schools, as far as I see it.
Because Lindsay was the owner.
They could move the teacher, but when the paedophile is the owner of the school, he's responsible for insuring his school, and he cannot insure himself against his own criminal behaviour. That's what the lawyers are saying, and so there's no valid insurance, even if he did insure himself. And so there's no compensation available for the survivors. So in order to get a lawyer, what I did quite early on was I got a copy of his will and probate and the estate of Robin Lindsay, which was quite valuable. And I wrote to the Lord Chief Justice of England, and I said, well, the first one who'd organised the tribunal, I wrote to him in the House of Lords 3 times, and he didn't reply. So then I wrote to the present one, then it was Lord Thomas, and I got a reply, and it just said that my letter had been noted, and I'd asked him to freeze his assets so that they were available for survivors because of what had happened. And I knew that there would be literally hundreds, dozens, but probably hundreds of victims and survivors of Robin Lindsay. But if you went right the way back, the numbers, you've got no idea. And you don't even know if they've survived, because I'm very lucky that my brothers are all still alive. I know sisters who've lost their brothers to child abuse in boarding schools.
So wait, you say that Lindsay has an estate. What is the value of his estate?
Well, it was massive. The estate his father bought him and that he inherited was very sizable. There were a lot of outbuildings. And in fact, when he was banned, he was moved to a house called the Richmond Villas, which was in Richmond Road. There were 2 4-bedroom houses, Moss House and Kent House, and he lived in an empty, otherwise empty 4-bedroom house with a big garden, right next to the second largest Sherborne boys boarding house, with 100 boys or so next door on one side, and the rear entrance to Sherborne Prep on the other side. So there you have a fixated paedophile without any criminal criminal charges or whatever against him, just living there and inviting boys in for tea. I found this out, and they were nicking all his alcohol. I mean, no, what's the word? Just so negligent. Yeah. Unbelievably negligent. Not, the parents who were sending their children there had no idea.
Oh, wait. Then you're saying that after he left the school and the school changed ownerships, he was living on that property there? I don't know.
He still owned the estate. He still owned a lot of the land, and they didn't have very much money to buy the school. Yeah. The building. So they just had they had one building, and they had to kind of get a loan from Lindsay to buy it. It was very peculiar. They didn't sort of buy it outright, and then they lied to victims and survivors coming forward, saying they didn't know anything about him. They lied to me, and Lindsay was still living on the estate for like 12 years.
And IAPS, and have you explored suing IAPS, because they're the ones that are overseeing this, right?
Yeah, well, my problem is, you've got to have a pot of gold to interest lawyers. You've got to have something to tempt them. And the only thing I had was the estate of Lindsay, and I didn't even know if it had been frozen. So when I went up to the independent inquiry, I met the QCs up there, and they were asking me what I'd done because they didn't understand how the estate was still available. And I said, well, I wrote to the Lord Chief Justice of England. I said, you're my last chance of justice, honestly, for my family. And he'd obviously done it, but he didn't tell me he'd done it because the estate's still there. And Lindsay's nephew is arguing that that it shouldn't go to survivors and that it's his. But, how could you, after you've had the independent inquiry and after you've had, all the police, he's got not a leg to stand on, but even now, months later, there's been no settlement. The survivors had nothing. They've had no mental health support, nothing at all. And now you've got Alan Turing's stuff being returned to the big school, and they've got a bronze statue made of him, and they made a bronze statue of Lindsay. At least, in my pinned tweet, you can see a picture of it. The vicar's blessing it. They need to acknowledge what's happened in their history, and they need to set up a survivors fund for these children who are going to come forward. And, they're like ticking time bombs, because I said only the older ones had come forward. And you've got all these younger ones, because he was only removed in 98, so some of them are very young indeed. 20s and 30s, 40s. It just... sorry.
No, that's okay.
It got worse and worse. It got worse and worse. And my youngest brother said, the thing about the 10 showers a day.
Right.
He was really out of control, and he was like flashing. He wasn't dressing properly. It was like, not properly doing up his pajamas, and walking undressed or around the school and teaching in his pajamas and stuff like that. But because he owned the school, nobody dared remove him or stand up to him or call him out.
Tell us, how is a Qatar, or Qatar, I guess you pronounce it over there, right? How does that fit into all this?
Okay, so my father went out to Qatar in 1971 when he left. He used to be a naval pilot at Dartmouth. And he went out to Qatar initially for Shell, and then he set up the Qatar Air Force with another pilot. And he was also a test pilot. And they were buying, well, one of the reasons was when my elder brother was born, the tradition was in military families that you put your children names down at birth for public schools in England. And so when he had 4 children, it was going to be an expensive business. And he was pensioned out of the Navy, so he chose to go to Qatar because it would be tax-free. And that was sort of how we went out there in the 70s. And when he visited me in Sherborne when I was a girl there, they would be delegates of Qataris, including a member of the royal family, who would come and buy helicopters and Lynx helicopters from Westlands, which was about 5 minutes down the road. And they would stay very close to my Sherborne girls' house in Dorset. And so I'd have dinner with them, and they'd talk about the franchising of the prep school, because my father had his 4 schools in Sherborne, and I explained to you how important a prep school was, that you have to have a common entrance pass to get to Eton or Harrow, any of the top British public schools, but they didn't want to send their little children away because it wasn't in their culture to do that, like it is in my culture. So both my parents were sent to boarding school when they were 8. Well, my dad when he was 4, and my mother when she was 8. So it was in our family background. And so that was why they wanted the prep school in Qatar. And that was why, as far as I can see, the reason why the big schools bought the prep school for £1 from the paedophile, because they knew that the Emir of Qatar had been educated in Dorset before Lindsay was removed. It was in the 90s, about 94 to 97, he was at Sherborne International. And the headmaster of the boys' school says that he knows of no linkage between the establishment of Sherborne Prep in Qatar and Lindsay. But in fact, we are the linkage. My father is the linkage. My brothers, my family are the linkage. And in fact, the Emir himself was in Dorset, educated in Dorset. So the point is that the franchises were very, very lucrative, and they were planned a long, long time ago. And they were spoken about in the 1970s when I was having dinner. So it didn't happen, much later than that. It's this desperate distancing again that I'm talking about, where they don't want to have anything to do with Lindsay. But the point is, it's all historic. It's all part of it. And you can't just separate it and say, that was the incentive for them to buy the school and whitewash it. And the problem I had was the whitewashing of the history of child abuse was so, so difficult to expose and, to try and get justice, to speak about it even, or to, I got ostracized. Nobody wanted me to do it. And the same with all the survivors that I've spoken to and that are court participants at the independent inquiry in London. Very difficult, to deal with their families, and it causes huge rifts in the family as well. But yeah, that's the Qatar connection.
Well, let me ask you this thing. Now, are you saying that the government of Qatar is invested in the school?
Yeah, the royal family, really. I mean, you'd say the government of Qatar, but
right.
I suppose it's the royal family. The man who came to Sherborne with my father in the 1970s was Prince Saud, who's the CEO of the QIA, the Qatar Investment Authority. Prince Saud, he has a slightly different name, but that's how I knew him. And he met me in London after my father died and took me for dinner to talk about my father. But they came by helicopters, and they fell in love with Sherborne. And what he also had, he was the Crown Court advisor, so the Emir of Qatar was his mentor. And after Sherborne, he went to Harrow and then Sandhurst, and it's called soft power, the sort of education of would-be kings, future kings, and it connects them to English establishments, and they become very fond. And so you have this franchising, and in fact, Prince Andrew was involved or very familiar with the franchising of British public schools, and that there are articles in the Telegraph where he speaks about it and how it's worth billions to the British economy. But my problem with it is the whitewashing of the child abuse, and the way that the school was misrepresented completely in Qatar, and I don't suppose they told the royal family of Qatar the truth about the history.
Well, it would seem to me that
the royal history and how long it is.
But now it would seem to me that the new owners and the royal families in Qatar would not want the name of this Sherborne school besmirched by these allegations. Now, has anybody approached them? Right? Has anybody approached them for a settlement?
No, I've written to them, but with a blockade, it was very difficult to get any letters through. I tried the military attaché's office because that's where he was the military attaché in London. I tried our foreign office as well. I said, this is going to come out because it's the independent inquiry. Boris Johnson was then the foreign minister. I wrote to him. I said, really this is going to need some diplomacy because, it's different if it's a care home and there's not a lot of money involved. But this is different. These children have, their parents have paid a fortune. It's a fraudulent education. And not only that, but the franchise is worth millions and millions of pounds every year. The royal family of Qatar pay Sherborne schools well over $1 million every single year since 2009, just to use the name alone. And then I think the big schools own some part of the school in Qatar. And there are several schools in Qatar. I think they were going to open a second Sherborne Prep. And they misrepresent the history because they describe it as long and distinguished and having an enviable academic reputation, when actually, it's been run by paedophiles for 75 years, Father Fred and Robin Lindsay, disgusting paedophiles. That's the truth of it.
Now, outside of your own efforts, is there anyone else pursuing litigation?
Not apart from my efforts, no.
This is fascinating to me. I tell you, if this was happening here in the United States, I would have 100 lawyers for you right now beating down your door to take this case.
I've tried everybody. I've tried honestly, and every single time I got let down. It's unbelievable that there's no recourse. And in fact, they have one recourse here. It's called the Criminal Injuries Compensation Authority, and I put 2 claims in for 2 of my brothers, and the amount I was offered was so pathetic. Not even for a whiplash injury, for having spent 5 years with a paedophile. And the effect that's had. So 2 of my brothers have never got married. They have no family. You can't actually quantify the damage that does, quite apart from, the money that my father paid Robin Lindsay directly to educate my brothers.
Well, we are out of time now. What would you like to leave the audience with? And I know you have a live stream coming up this week. You want to tell the audience about it's coming up on the Sonia.
Sonia Poulsen.
Yeah, how can we hear that?
Okay, so on Friday, I think between 6 and 6:30, I'm going to be the first guest on Sonia Poulsen's live stream. She's done exposures, documentaries called Paedophiles in Parliament, I think, and she has a live stream. But I don't know very much about it. It's very, very new for me to speak, and I'm sorry that I probably sort of been a bit heavy.
Did a great job. You did a great job, and people can find you on Twitter. What's your Twitter handle again? People can find you.
It's at JE Britain 2.
JE Britain.
And there's a lot of threads. There's some film clips, some news clips as well. A video that my brother was filmed in. because he's an actor, my elder brother. His weight is anonymity, and he's been filmed. He and I were on the news together, very briefly speaking about it. But it needs to be acknowledged, and if possible, a compensation fund for survivors needs to be set up by the school, because it's a very famous school.
It seems to me there's a lot of people with a lot of money. I don't know. We're gonna have to take a look at this. Okay, we're out of time.
It's very different from care homes. You were talking about King Cora. It's a very different thing, but it's really important.
We are out of time. Thank you so much, Joanna Britton. Keep an eye. Thank you so much for the work you're doing here, exposing this horrible situation over there at the Sherborne Prep. Keep in touch too. If anything new comes up, you need to come on here. We'll put you right in here. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.